Now, not only we understand that China today has much greater political ambition, and also we're looking at this economic agenda. Now, if you follow the news closely, and recently the current Chinese president quickly wrapped up his visit in Vietnam, and given the fact that this what we call the strategic partnership between China and some of the critical nations in Southeast Asia are actually generating much greater noises. Simply because the project known as Belt and Road Initiative. Now keep in mind, more than 100 countries today actively participating in the project, but actually in reality, some countries are not actually buying the stories from China anymore. And for example, the nation of Italy, and recently decided to pull out the membership, or should we say, pull out this participation, and believe there's gonna be something more than just this political or economic ambition under the current Chinese government. Well, is that so? How should we understand that? But meanwhile, for this bigger picture, how should we assess the relationship between China and some of the countries in Europe in general? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, and who is Mr. Filippo Fasulo. Again, if you're familiar with Mr. Fasulo's work, and he's an expert on international relationship and particularly focused on China and also the European countries, and look at this economic and political area as well. Well, Mr. Fasulo, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Hi, thank you for the invitation.
Well, Mr. Fasulo, I want to get started. Again, as we mentioned before, this year it's rather crucial for China, again, given the fact that we're looking at this Belt and Road Initiative. Let me ask you the first question. How should we understand and assess the decision made by the Italian government that pull out from the Belt and Road Initiative? And does that mean that China has already lost its charm to the nation of Italy? What do you say to that?
But the point is actually China lost part of its charm towards the West in general, Europe in specific, and with Italy as well, I can say. Actually, the decision now is a decision that comes from the decision of 2019 to join the BRI with the MOU. It was a different Italian government. Back at the time, Italy just wanted to join BRI in order to strengthen political relationship and through strengthening political relations with China to strengthen economic relations with China. Actually, it didn't work. And so now, after 5 years, Italy had to decide what to do. Why? Because the agreement, the MOU signed in 2019, was about to expire in March 2024 and to be automatically renewed unless one of the two parties decide to withdraw. So it was time for Italy to decide what to do, and Italy decided to withdraw in order to not to put itself again in a particular position. Why I'm saying that? Because Italy participation to BRI was seen from Western partners, and especially European partners, as Italy being the weak link of European policy towards China.
Now, let's, before bringing China into our conversation, let's talk about this current political state in Italy. Now, Mr. Fasulo, what do you make of this current economic situation in Italy today? Now, keep in mind, and of course, you're the expert, not too long ago, I guess the whole world paid attention to the current economic situation and also related to this migration or the refugee crisis in Italy as well. So is it possible for us to assume that the Italian government today really want to focus on the domestic issue first instead of this continuation with this international relationship with China, particularly from this economic standpoint? What do you say to that?
The point is Italy needs to have a good, proper relation with China as other European countries are doing. The point is actually the way we are having our relation with China, so that through the lens of the MOU on BRI, actually frozen Italy-China relationship. We saw in the last 5 years many bilateral meetings between Macron, Scholz, or Merkel back at the time, and Xi Jinping, or even trilateral meetings between German, French, and Chinese leaders in the past few years, but actually almost no meeting between Italian and Chinese leaders. That's why Italy having any kind of affair with China was seen too politically sensitive from international perspective. Then, of course, having said that, Italy has many other important international issues to address: migration, economic, its economic relation with the European Union, and especially to have a close relationship with the United States. Let's say that, for example, this government is supposed to be the government of someone who in the past supported the Republicans, not the Democrats, and is closer to Republicans, not to Democrats, needs to be to have a good relationship with the current administration. Having said that, there is a reason actually to reinstate, to reaffirm the fact that Italy is clearly on the Western camp, on the US side. Actually, this was in reality never in discussion. But actually, what happened after the MOU in 2019, after signing the MOU in 2019, is that somebody thought that Italy would change its affiliation, its participation to one of two camps, Western or Eastern camp. This was not the case. So now Italy needs to clearly affirm where they stand, and in doing so, we will gain some consensus from European partners and American partners.
Now, Mr. Fasulo, internally speaking, do we see any type of political polarization in the nation of Italy today? I mean, again, I'm sure that this is not the first time that you are being asked that question, but I do want to get the discussion started. Again, when we look at the country of China, some mention that because of the internal political polarization, so we begin to see China not as a economic partnership or not as an ideal a partnership for economic mutual benefits, but instead we are seeing China as a political or economic threat to some extent, mainly because this political polarization taking place internally. So from your perspective, is this happening today in Italy when we talk about political polarization? So that's why China today, I don't want to say it's no longer attractive. It is still attractive, but it's not really the priority for Italy at this moment. What do you say to that?
I think that what changed the most is the international scenario. So I agree with you, it is a problem of polarization, but it's a problem of international polarization. So what we can do with China, every country with China, before the Congress in 2017 is different to what we can do right now. The way the world is looking at China right now is very much different. So if back in the past, back in 2017, back at the time when Xi Jinping went to Davos, it was easy. It was not problems. It's not problematic with allies to have a close political relation with China. After 2017 and 2018, with the last start of the trade war, is no longer the case. Having said that, we are seeing that, for example, the French president or the German prime minister rushed to be the first to be in Beijing 1 year ago. We remember Scholz being the first in December 2022, and Macron going spring later on. And so the problem is that Italy probably would like also to do a proper relation with China. So this must be clarified. It's not that Italy is cutting diplomatic ties with China. This is not the case, because there's no way to cut diplomatic ties with China, because China is the second economy in the world. The point is to properly put this relationship within the context of great power competition and within the context of the more freely discussion. That it was not the case anymore now within the context of the MOU on BRI. Actually, there were a couple of options regarding the expiring and renewing MOU. One is the one they're doing right now, so just to withdraw 3 months in advance. The other one was just to stay in without giving to minimizing the role of the MOU, because actually there are no commitments, no proper commitment because of the MOU. Actually, at the end of the day, it was decided it was better to closing this part of the relationship and to restart probably a new one. And what Italian authorities, Italian officials did in the last few months was to go to China to explain to the Chinese side the Italian position on that. And actually, there will be a visit of the Italian president of Republic Mattarella to China in the first few years of 2024, actually to represent, to say to the Chinese counterpart that Italy, of course, need to go on with the relationship, but with different starting points.
Mr. Fasulo, I want to ask the question in a bigger scale. Now, when we look at the relationship between China and Europe, now some mention that today, as you mentioned again, China is the second largest economy in the world, and also it's competing economically and politically speaking with the United States of America. Now, how much do you think that China today actually value this partnership with Europe? Because some experts believe, and I want to read a statement to you and want to get your a reaction. Now, recently, the Chinese foreign minister warned France's top diplomatic advisors recently, and then this is what he said, and I quote, "We must recognize that there's explicit element of rivalry in our relationship." I mean, despite the visit made by the French president, and also we'll look at the EU Commission president, and also the German chancellor as well. But China today still wanted to remind the world that there's an explicit element of rivalry in some sort of relationship. How would you, or what is your assessment to such a statement from this side?
I think it's true. There is a growing role for rivalry between the EU-China relations. Actually, this is the case since at least 2019, when the EU adopted the tripartite definition of a partner, competitor, and systemic rival. Actually, this rivalry is, of course, in terms of political way of ruling, but also in terms of manufacturing rivalry. The new facts coming from the EU-China summit, the recent EU-China summit, is that von der Leyen raised the issue of the overcapacity of China's manufacturing. So the point is that now the Chinese economy needs to change, needs to shift away from investment in real estate. They are investing very much in manufacturing, and China will probably take a larger share of global manufacturing quotas. And this, of course, will probably affect EU's manufacturing quotas, especially at a time when the EU is focused very much on industrial subsidies, in industrial policies, and when Europe is trying to relaunch its manufacturing base. This probably is going to be a source of friction for the coming years. This probably is going to be one of the most important issues between EU and China in the coming years, especially because the EU side think that Chinese are boosting too much production in China, and the Chinese are just saying they are doing normal economic activities. And so we saw in the last couple of years, a stunning rise of the EU deficit with China from roughly around 100 billion euro to over 400 billion euro, and this is going to be a major source of concern, and especially in the sector of automotive. It used to be the only sector where the EU was running surplus towards China, and now is I don't know if it's already in deficit, but it's coming soon towards a deficit with China.
Now, I want to go back to again the war in Ukraine at this moment. As we mentioned before, at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the whole world, number one, was in astonishment. And number two, we're looking at some of the countries started to take sides. I mean, again, I want to be careful, may not use the phrase take sides, but started to commit to help and support the nation of Ukraine. But meanwhile, a statement came out recently from China's former ambassador to EU. And this is what the statement went, and I also want to get your reaction on this. This is what he said, and I quote, "Regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict, China does not need Europeans to tell us what to do." Now, I believe the whole world, including especially the United States of America, and urged China to take a bold step to be against Russia. And again, we've seen the devastation and we've seen this jeopardy the nation caused over the war. But meanwhile, China's attitude is, hey, listen, we know what we're doing, and we don't need any backseat drivers, and we don't need anyone to tell us how to manage the business or the relationship. Why do you think that China today is still holding this attitude that don't need any advisors, particularly from the Europeans, to tell them what to do? But meanwhile, we still need to expect some changes from China. What do you make of that?
The point is actually, I think there's not a clear understanding of what China is doing, what China wants. So some people actually still think that China is the China it was before 2017, before 2012, so before Xi Jinping rulership. But now, so when the time and when China was supposed to join the international community as it was designed by the West in the past few years. And so actually it was a kind of illusion, I would say. But now China is very explicit in saying that they would like to renew the international order, and Russia is the best partner to renew the international order. That's why I think China has its position of pro-Russian neutrality in the war, not because they approve what the Russians are doing with the Ukraine, but because Russia are the best friends, allies, call as you want, in order to renew the international order. And I think it's not by chance that since 2022, we are speaking more and more about the rise of Global South. Global South, of course, is a term with a long history, but it was almost just left to specialists on the development study and that. But now Global South is a term everybody knows about and everybody speaks about. Why? Because from the Chinese point of view, and also from the Russian point of view, there is an interest to boost the idea that there is a rising new world opposed to the traditional G7 Western-led world. And we have to read the Russia aggression to Ukraine, and especially China's reaction to the Russian aggression to Ukraine from this lens, and as well Chinese position towards the Israel-Hamas conflict is probably similarly. So from this point of view, it's clear that China won't listen to advice coming from the West, because actually the advice coming from the West are exactly what they want to change, what they want to review.
Now, one more question before we move on to the last section of the conversation. We know that initially after the current president, Emmanuel Macron, and also the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, visited China, both leaders faced heavy criticism, domestically speaking. And so, in other words, some scholars would say some parts of the world and believe that those two leaders were even more people tend to patronize China because the power and because the influence and the impact. Now, do you think that by visiting China or building this relationship from this economic or political standpoint actually elevated the status of Emmanuel Macron and also Olaf Scholz? What do you think of that? Or do you think that we should definitely try to keep this carrot and stick relationship with China at this moment? What do you think of that?
I think that now access to China is going to change. It's going to be restricted from decision made by the Chinese, and it's going to be restricted by decision made by EU and the US. So the point is that only few will get benefit from being in China, and the competition we saw, the rivalry between Germany and France was a rivalry in order to get preferential access to Chinese market. So that is the main point, especially because everybody is facing economic headwinds, and so if you can get as much benefit you can from the Chinese market, especially when others are pulling out, when others are decoupling, when others are de-risking, when others are reshoring, friendshoring, whatever you want, is going to be very much profitable for your country, for your companies, for their shareholders, and for your electors and whatsoever. So this is the point. In a time of transformation, to get the most from, or in terms of benefits, because of especially a proper relation with China. So we know, for example, that part of the success story of Germany in the last 40 years comes from being the first to enter China in the 80s, especially in the automotive sector. So actually, the idea is try to solve a very difficult equation right now. The problem to be solved right now is how to deal with China in the time of economic security or great power competition and whatsoever. If someone can crack this equation, can find a solution, this is going to be very rewarding in terms of economic benefit, rewarding for the politician who can get this, especially rewarding for the country that can get its preferential access in the very complicated scenario we are seeing.
Now, Mr. Fasulo, two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about the military power in China today. Now, we understand that when we look at the war in Ukraine and also look at the war in Israel, people begin to be very concerned about what they called aggressive military power in China. Escalating the concerns is beyond this economic destabilization and caused, again, major concern in the eyes of the European decision makers. Now, at this moment, when we look ahead in the year of 2024, how much should we be concerned regarding the Chinese military power? And why do you think, from the European perspective, we need to pay attention to the ongoing exercise and also the empowerment of such move? What do you say to that?
You really should be present and relevant, military speaking, also in the Indo-Pacific region, in South China Sea and whatsoever, especially in order to show to the partners there that you care of their security issues. Especially, it's not so easy to assess what is exactly the Chinese military power, because if you just look at the figures of military spending, still the United States are spending much more, and they have a stock of something previously spent in the last few years that is uncomparable. But actually, we don't know if there is any hidden cost, and even if there is any hidden expenditure from the Chinese side, we know how much it is. And then there is another point. We learn from the recent war between Russia and Ukraine, and also from the Israel-Hamas situation, that actually war are very difficult to be won. Even if you are the strongest army, or we can even mention the Iraqi case, the Afghanistan case, and whatsoever. Even if you are the strongest army, then it doesn't mean you are going to win. And actually, it's even complicated to assess what to win means. So, having said that, the Chinese the capacity to invade Taiwan, have the capacity to seize Taiwan. But even if they seize Taiwan, how long they can take it and how much is gonna cost them? And having said that, are they aware of the cost they might they might have to bear, or the political gain they think is gonna be much more important than any economic cost? Actually, there are many variables and factors to be considered. And actually, of course, the least we can do is just to be ready as much as we can, and especially to show our partners there, democracies there, and actually that we care for rules, and that especially we care for rules not only when they are breaking in the European continent, like in the case of Ukraine, but wherever it happens. Otherwise, it will happen what is already happening now with the Russian aggression to Ukraine, that the EU asked for help and support to the global south and global south answer, but we do have our own crisis, and you're not paying any attention on that. And we can see even the case of Venezuela and Guyana, and probably there are tens of that. So it needs to be there in order to show the part that for us, the rules are important.
Mr. Fasulo, I want to ask the last question. Let's go back to Italy. Again, based on what you just said, even though Italy pull out this Belt and Road Initiative, but that doesn't mean Italy is done with China. I mean, again, we still have this ongoing business, investment, and of course, cultural, and also we'll look at this engagement as well. Now, what will be the next step from your perspective that for this healthful relationship keep going between Italy and China, even though it's not part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But for this coming year, how do you think that we can see much greater opportunities? Any predictions?
It's not that easy, actually, to say. The point is, the first is to restart, to rebuild trust between the two sides. And once we have trust, we can assess proper investment, but investment that should be seen as, let's say, not predatory investment, but investment, taking a Chinese word, we say, of mutual benefit. It can proper win cooperation between the two sides. Actually, this is, I think, the most important thing. There are maybe some other anniversary next year to be recorded around the name of Marco Polo, Matteo Ricci, so some of the most important figures for Italy-China relations. The point is to depoliticize the relationship and to normalize the relationship and to restart. And actually, I think this goal to normalize Italy-China relationship is in the interest of Italy, of course, but also in the interest of China, and is also in the interest of EUs, because actually to have Italy on the same page of EUs is of EU's interest.
Indeed. Again, Mr. Fasulo, you're such an amazing expert, and again, it's such an honor to have you on our show as we continue to pay attention to this relationship between China and Italy, even though we don't know what's going to happen in the future or next year. But we do know, as you mentioned before, trust is one of the fundamental elements between two countries. It's not just about the word between the two leaders, it's actually between the two countries. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to speak to Mr. Filippo Fasulo. Again, I strongly encourage everyone again online to connect with Mr. Fasulo, especially follow his work and publications. Thank you so much for your time as an amazing scholar. Help us with better understanding about this issue between China and Italy. Again, love to have you back on the show for our future episodes. Thank you so much for doing this.